Molly. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk all about how to ditch the social drama and how to actually have an anti-social strategy, which is really, really fun and so cohesive with my brand and what everyone in my audience actually does when it comes to YouTube and really creating that passive social media kind of engine, YouTube engine. So I'm so happy you're here. Can you introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I know we have a lot in common, but teach different things, which is really cool. I feel like those are
Yes.
like the best type of relationships. So my name is Molly Haynes. I'm actually in Columbus, Ohio. I have a 22-year corporate strategy background and decided in January of 2020 that I wanted to teach strategy to business owners. I had no idea what that would turn into. I say that I did things a little bit backwards and I hired a coach before I had a business, and I was like, I know the business acumen. I've been in it for years, but like, tell me how to do it online. And long story short, we ended up launching a podcast. It's called Crush the Brush. And then it sort of grew and scaled from there. The interesting part about this story, though, is up until 2.5 years ago, I was still working in corporate full time. So 98% of my business was built while I was in the corporate world. And I always joke, like, I couldn't use social media the way that, we were sort of taught or that you see, because I was in meetings all day and I couldn't like go to my CEO and be like, hey, now's the appropriate time for me to post this. Like, I need to step away to do an Instagram live. Like, that strategy just didn't work for me because I didn't have the time or the means to do that. I also, at the time, I had twins and they were kindergarten. So you can imagine, like, going through the pandemic, working full time, having twins. Like, I just didn't have a lot of time. And so I really had to lean into, I always say you don't have to copy and paste everyone else's business model. And so I really leaned into, how can I create a business model that allows me flexibility, but still reaches and makes the impacts that I want on a schedule that works for me and our family. So that's what I teach.
I love that so, so much. And it aligns so much with my brand values too. And I think that's why when we got connected and started talking,
Yeah.
I wanted to have you on this podcast and on the channel so much because I agree with everything you're saying. Because business really isn't a one size fits all. And I think there are too many gurus out there teaching that, like, oh, my strategy is the only way to grow on Instagram or grow on YouTube or grow on this. And that's just not the case. And I love that your story proves that you can still grow a business while working corporate or while having twins or while, going traveling or doing whatever it is that you want to do. It's really possible. It's just making your business work for you. So I love that. Can we dive a little bit deeper into, how you did that, how you built your business while working full time?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I did, and I kind of mentioned it in my story, was I started a podcast. And so to me, I kind of think of my podcast as kind of like your YouTube channel. Like, my recommendation is like, pick one thing that you really, really like doing, because if you don't like doing it and you sign yourself up to do it every week, like, you're going to be miserable, right? But pick something that you enjoy doing and then go all in on that. And so for me, podcasting was something where I could do it on my own schedule. That's before I had guests, right? And then even if I did have guests, like, I can pick and choose when I wanted to do the interviews for the most part. So that's kind of where we started. That was like our first stepping stone. And then the second stepping stone was, hey, I have all this content, right? Like, I've got videos of me talking. I have interviews with people. I can do my own episodes. And so this became sort of my like long form content hub. And then I just went on this like repurposing. I don't know. I don't even know what you would call it, but like, we repurpose every single podcast episode. I think we're up to like 15 different pieces of content a week. So we have 2 podcasts that come out every week, and then you multiply that times 15. So that's 30 pieces of content that we could potentially create from 2 episodes. And if you're just getting started, it doesn't need to be that big. And it didn't start like that, but it was like these little gradual steps of, this is what I like doing. I can teach, I can share, I can provide value. And then how do we, work smarter, not harder, and turn that into content that actually helps us sell later on?
Yeah, I love that. And like we said, it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and like all the places that just burn us out. It really is going
I don't
all
have
in.
TikTok. Everyone's like, you what? And I was like, it makes my head spin. I can't. So
It's
it's
okay.
okay. You can pick what you like.
Totally. It's a dark hole is what I like to call TikTok, because I'll like spend
Yeah.
hours scrolling on it. And so it's not a good use of your time, honestly, sometimes. So maybe better not to have it. But you can just go all in on one thing. And I love that. And podcasting and YouTube have such a great synergy between them for that repurposing aspect that you just talked about. So whether you're creating a YouTube channel or a podcast or both, because there can be the same thing, you can create video podcasts now. That repurposing thing that you were talking about, that system, is so key. And I think it's a big piece that people miss out on is work smarter, not harder. You've created this large piece of content that is so valuable. Like even this video podcast we're creating right now, I'm going to repurpose it into a bunch of different content that we can put up on our channels, because we are creating value and telling people a strategy and giving them a new perspective that they can use in their business. So why wouldn't you break that down into more pieces and kind of put that across your platforms to save yourself time? I love that. So tell us a little bit about your repurposing strategy in general.
Yeah, so the way that I teach is I say that, social media is like the sidecar, is like the second act. So I've had, instances where our account has been completely taken down multiple times, like it's totally disappeared. I've also had instances where, like, after as we're recording this, I just got back from like a 3-week break. Like I just didn't post because, well, I did a little bit, but it was more for fun. It was not strategic at all. And so it's nice for me to know that I don't have to rely on social media at all unless I want to. So for me, that's just having a healthy relationship with social media, which I also think is important. And I think at the beginning of business, we think that we have to be online all the time. And so there's really 2 ways that I do that. One is through having some sort of starting point, which is it could be a podcast, it could be a blog, it could be a YouTube video, whatever that is, and repurposing. And I can sort of share what that looks like. And then the second is a really robust email strategy. And we can now land a whole podcast interview on funnels. But I actually recommend that you have 2. One is that you have some sort of, you hear lead magnets all the time. I think people are really tired of just downloading a PDF. Like they expect a win out of something that they're getting. And so I always say, like, take your lead magnet and make it into a client attraction system. Like make it do the work for you. So it might be, maybe you have a PDF now, but then you listen to this and you're like, oh, I'm going to make it into a challenge with videos. And then I'm going to layer more free stuff into those emails. And so when people first meet you and you can give them a win and then you can provide them additional resources, you want their response to be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how much I learned from Melissa and listening to this. And this is amazing. So I actually have different paths that people can take depending on what they're downloading. And then after that, I move them into a sales sequence. And so this is like a 3-week period of time. Like they're not getting any other emails from me. They're getting to know me. We're helping you get a win. I'm like walking you through, your anti-social strategy. I get emails like, I can't believe you sent me all of this. I'm just getting to know you and you gave me this great win, right? And we're like building relationships, and then I, invite them into something else. So you don't even get to my weekly emails until you're about 3 to 4 weeks into our sequence. And when I share that, people are like, oh man, that's a lot of emails, but it does the work for me, right? So I have strategically put in the time to make sure that if you're reading these and you've given me your email address, that I'm going to give you a lot of value. And hopefully that's really helpful for you. So that's our first strategy. The second strategy is then repurposing. We use a tool called Metricool. I don't know if you've used Metricool before. I'm obsessed with it. It basically, I can take one video from a podcast, like a video like this, and I can schedule it and post it and turn it into, like I said, 12 to 15 different pieces of content, and it does it automatically. Like it's amazing. So that's sort of what we've leaned into a lot. So I'm repurposing our podcast. It goes to LinkedIn. It makes 2 Instagram posts. So I'll do like a reel of our video, and then I will create templates to make like a carousel post. Again, it's like this repeatable process every single week. It goes to Pinterest as a story pin. We then create a blog out of it. And so there's all different things that you can do with it, but it's all scheduled and it's a repeatable process that we do every single week. So Metrical is really, really a cool tool. It will save you a ton of time and you can post on a lot of different platforms and is really, really, really flexible. And then the last piece of the strategy is I always say anti-social doesn't mean that you don't use social. It just means it's like the second act. And so I shared how we create templates and we're resharing content in a different way on social. We use ManyChat to sort of engage with our listeners. I was actually on vacation last week and I had people commenting like, how are you responding? And it wasn't me. And my theory on ManyChat is I don't have a ton of followers. We actually restarted our account. So I think we have like 2,000 or something. But if I can use tools to help engage with people when I'm not online, even if it sends like, I don't know, one message every 3 or 4 days, that's probably saving me 30 to 40 minutes of time because we all know that when we like log into Instagram to go answer a DM, we like answer the DM, but then we like go do a million other things, right? So if I can use tools to help initiate the relationship and then ask questions back, so I'm answering the questions, but the tool is actually asking it, then it becomes this really cool circle of I'm inviting people into my world. They're getting the first response, which is automated, but then I'm asking questions in a way where it's me responding back.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's so time consuming to go back and have these DM conversations with people, especially if it's something as easy as, grab my client attraction system or my lead magnet or things like that. That can all be automated through a tool like ManyChat to save yourself time. And then you can leave the more not intense or like intentional, I should say, conversations for when you're actually online and you want to have those. But let automation do the heavy lifting for you. That is such a smart tactic. I use ManyChat in my business as well. And it's such a time saver. Same thing with Metricool. We use Metricool too. So it's funny that we're all in the same tools here. Yeah, it's great. And what I love so much about it is that it allows you to publish to so many different social media platforms. There are a lot of great schedulers out there, obviously, but I do really enjoy that one as well. And I recommend it to a lot of people. I want to go back for a second to what you first talked about, which was the email client attraction system, because I think this is such a big thing that people need to realize in 2024 is that email needs to be a bigger thing than just here's my lead magnet PDF and a quick welcome series, which is what we were taught, a couple years down the road was you could just have a 5 email welcome series, right? That was always the thing, 5 email welcome series and your lead magnet, and you were supposed to get clients. But the online world is saturated now, and people need more nurturing. People need more information. People need to get to know you and know you, like you, trust you way more than they ever used to. And I really love that client acquisition system that you talked about and how it really is like 3 to 4 weeks before they're even getting a sales email from you. Because at that point, they've been warmed up so much. They've gotten so much quality from you. And they're like, oh, Holly can help me create this system for myself. Like I've gotten a quick win, but how much more could I get from her if I hired her? And that's what we want. And I think that's the missing piece that a lot of people aren't implementing in their businesses. And so I love that you touched on that.
Yeah, I love this because, well, one, I say like emails having like a cauliflower moment because, cauliflower had a moment where it was like coming back, and I feel like email and blogging and like newsletters is all like kind of coming back. But I agree. So I think the statistic used to be you had to see something like 5-7 times before you actually took action on it. And now it's like 56 or something. So when I tell you to send like 7 emails about your freebie and then another like 7 emails about, something that you're offering, people are like, oh my God, that's so many emails. And I'm like, think how many emails you get in a day, right? Or I always use like the Old Navy example. I don't know if you're on Old Navy's email list, but they send emails like once a day. And most of the time I open them because I'm like, oh, what are they talking about today? Right? Like, what's the thing? And so, it's one thing to have like the funnels in place where you're consistently providing value, but I think it's another thing to really think about after that's over, like how are you continuing to nurture your audience? And for us, we actually send 3 emails a week. And when we started this strategy, it was actually a year ago, almost to the day when we started doing this. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. This feels like a lot of emails. And it increased our engagement by 150%. Because I trained my audience to now know what to expect. So we send a newsletter on Friday. I always say don't call it a newsletter because no one's going to sign up to get more emails. But if you phrase it in a way of I'll give you one strategy tip a week that you can implement in a minute or less, people are like, oh, I want to see what that is, right? So it is a newsletter, but hopefully it's really valuable. So we send those every Friday. And then on Sundays, we send what I call a strategy stack. It's I call it a shorty email where it's one tip, one focus, one ask. And so it's something that you can implement right away. And then usually we're linking something for people to do. So it might be something free, like a podcast, or it might be a paid offer. And then Wednesdays, we usually do some sort of podcast email or client highlight. That one's a little bit more flexible. But it's a lot of emails. So I love emails, but we have the stats that show that, people will use them and implement them. And I think before you send anything, you have to make sure that you're not just sending it to send it. Don't just send it because you listen to a podcast and Holly said to send it. Let's send it because there's something really valuable in it. And people are going to be like, yes, I'm so excited to try this week. Or I didn't know that. Now I'm going to, be more aware, whatever your topic is.
Yeah. What's the intention behind the piece of content you're creating, right? And this is a lens that you should be putting on for everything you create in your business is what is the intention behind it? What's the intention behind your podcast, your YouTube video, your email, your social media post? And what is the value that you're going to bring to your audience when you create that? Because I think that's how you create content that's actually going to get opened, actually worthwhile, actually going to keep people subscribed, all the things. So kind of piggybacking off of that, I have a interesting thought process on repurposing content because there's a lot of people out there who are teaching repurposing, but what is a good piece of content to actually repurpose? Because if you're repurposing content that's not actually converting in the first place, are we just creating more boxes to check off? What is your thought process on that? Creating the repurposable content in the first place.
That's a great question. So for us, our starting point is some podcasts, which I can see by our downloads, what topics are resonating. And then usually I create more of what that is. So if you don't have a podcast, maybe your starting point is an email or a blog, but I always like to look at the data. So you could do it over a month or a quarter and really look at what are the open rates of these emails? What are the click rates? What are the downloads? And that's going to give you some insight into what people are listening to and what they're not. The other thing that I also do is, so we repurpose almost 98% of our content from the podcast. But when you look at my Instagram posts, they're from my emails. So I will take the podcast and I'll write the emails, but then I'm not creating something new to go on social. I'm just taking pieces and parts of it. So that's kind of behind the scenes, but I think to answer your question, I would keep track of the data. So we usually do it once a month and we look at what's the most open emails, where are people coming from? Let's say you have a repurposing strategy to repurpose to Pinterest and nobody opened any of your pins, right? Then maybe you just pause that for a little bit and go focus on YouTube or something different. You don't have to do all of them at once. We just started a YouTube channel and I think we went from 13 to 26 subscribers this week. We are really, really on it. It's very new, fresh new, but that's something that I'm looking at because I'm okay, we're not increasing, then is it worth my time, right? I need to see some, it's not super fast, but we're seeing some trends. So I would look at the data.
Yeah, 100%. And that is such an important thing to think about, is not just creating content for the sake of content. And I think sometimes when people hear repurposing, that can be a trend that they get into. It's oh, well, I'm just going to repurpose everything and throw it against the social media wall and hope it sticks, right? And that's just a strategy that's going to lead to burnout. And so even though repurposing is a really powerful strategy to save time, we want to make sure we're doing it with a strategy and with data behind it, so that we're not just like I said, creating more boxes to check off. And so, like you said, look at the data And if your videos or your podcasts or your emails aren't performing, how can we tweak that to make it better so that that data is improving so that when we repurpose that content, we know it's going to work instead of just hoping and praying that it's working.
Yeah. The other thing I'll share, and I talk about this in our program Anti-Social School, and that is like, what's your home base? So like my home base is the podcast. That's where like I would point people to. But like I have a lot of corporate clients. Instagram doesn't matter to them. Like they're like CEOs and CFOs. Like they're not on Instagram. They're not going to get new clients from there. So I'm like, you don't have to be there. Like just because you see other people who have businesses who are there. Just like I said, I'm not on TikTok. I'm sure that my clients are on TikTok, but like I won't like it. Just makes my husband. I don't do well on it. So it's like, okay, well, my home base is a podcast. I'm going to choose that first. But maybe your home base is LinkedIn, or maybe your home base is YouTube, or maybe it's Pinterest. You have to really think about where are your people hanging out. Most people are hanging out kind of everywhere, but you have to think about like your unicorn clients. Like, where are they coming from? Are they, most of the time, if they can hear your voice, just like the power of video and things like that, if they're going to convert faster. So I always try to think about where I can use those tools and where they're hanging out sort of on those types of platforms.
Yeah, I 100% agree that you do need to pick one place, because if you try to be on everywhere, try to be everywhere, you're going to burn yourself out. And this is all about the anti-social strategy,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, like the anti-hustle.
Right.
I don't want any of that in my life. I don't want to be burnt out and constantly hustling. I want a business that allows me freedom and to be able to take time off and to be able to do the things that I want to do without being stressed out. And so I like that analogy of the home base, picking one place. And then, like you said, you just started your YouTube channel, right? Because you've created your podcast, you've created a strategy for repurposing, and now you're like, okay, now I'm ready to add another layer to that, right? But when you're first starting out, don't judge your business based on what everyone else is doing, because someone else might be 10 steps ahead, right? Someone listening to this or watching this might look and say, oh, well, Holly's on all these platforms. I'm going to be on all of these platforms, but you're in a different place in your business than maybe they are. And so start where you are and start with your one home base, and then add on repurposing, and then add on another platform, right? And that is the way to slowly build the building blocks to a successful business.
Yeah, depends on that. Such a good summary.
It was a good summary. So for everyone listening, I kind of want to wrap this up with, what do you see are like the biggest pitfalls that people are kind of falling into when it comes to repurposing and their social media strategy in general?
Yeah, I love this question. First is people aren't sending emails and they get nervous to send more than one. And I mean, I think I sent 5 this week. We just got back from vacation and I was like, I have some things to say. I'm going to send some emails. So there's that. The second thing is a lot of times you hear about, I call it a content attraction strategy. So it's like, how do you attract people into your world, like into your email list? And I think people are afraid to talk about their freebie. They're like, oh, I created this freebie and, no one's in it. I'm like, well, have you talked about it? Have you launched it? Like I teach like to actually launch your freebie, like launch it like it's like a program and get, 500 people in it and then come back to me and say what happened. Because if you can get, again, people in there to get data, then you're going to have so many more ideas on content and what people like and what people don't like. So I think, it's email and actually talking about the thing that you're doing, even if it is free. And then the third one is, and I talk a lot about podcasts and the power of podcasts. And a lot of people are like, well, I've been on, 5 or 6 podcasts and nothing happened. And I always say, like, you can't just go on a podcast tour and expect people to like magically fall in your inbox. You have to be really strategic about where you're pointing them to, going back to the funnels that we were sort of talking about at the beginning. And so you are going to put yourself in front of other audiences, whether it's a summit or a podcast or a room of people. You have to point them to something that's going to provide more value. And I think a lot of times people forget that. They forget that, like, if you're listening to this, maybe you'll Google me, maybe you won't, but hopefully you'll listen to the end and then I'll tell you like how you can learn more. And then you can, sort of take that next step and see this in action. And so I think a lot of people just forget that they have to be very direct about inviting people into their world.
Yeah, for sure. We always forget the ask, right? Because there's something in us that maybe feels like, oh, we can't be salesy, or we're going to, be too slimy about asking for things or asking for the sale. But you're really, again, come back at it with the lens of value and, what is
Mhm.
it that you're giving your audience? And if your freebie and your client attraction system is valuable and giving them something, then you should want to shout it from the rooftops. And so come at it with that
Yeah.
lens, and I think you'll be off on the right track. So that is the perfect segue into what is
Yeah.
your freebie for our audience today.
Yeah. So my secret tip is whenever you present your freebie to like actually tell a story so people remember it. So you always say like people remember stories.
I love
And
that.
so now you'll remember the story because like telling you behind the scenes why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. But we talked a little bit about, client attraction and funnels and all the things and how much I love podcasting. So I actually put together a 5 parts fully free private podcast and you can listen and I'll actually walk you through how to create your own client attraction system. So I talk about like, what is your home base? Where are your people hanging out? How do you actually present yourself on podcasts or when you're in a room networking? Give you like some of my favorite networking tips and really talking about how to sort of build those relationships using email and different tools that aren't necessarily social media. And you can get that by going to hollymariehaynes.com/social and you can download the full thing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. I will make sure to leave that link in the show notes and the description below this video and podcast as well for everyone. So make sure to head over there and grab that. The one question I always like to ask my guests before we kind of wrap everything up is, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned in your business so far?
I have a bunch of quotes above my sort of desk here. And one of my favorite ones is that your vision has to be bigger than just you, right? So I could come on here and I could tell you like how amazing my private podcast is. But what's more valuable is if I can think about all of the amazing women that are going to download this and then listen to it and then be like, wow, if they can do this, they can then, spend more time with their family or quit their corporate job. And like, what kind of impact is that going to make? And so when you think about, writing your emails or putting things out there, I always like to think about like the vision is not me, right? It's like the impact that I can make and making that vision more than just like I'm, want to get this out to the world kind of thing.
I love that quote. I'm going to have to add that to my sticky notes of quotes on my computer,
Yeah, it
because you're
always
right.
motivates me because it's like, okay, if I can just reach one person and they get excited about the fact that they don't have to post 17 times a day, then that's worth it to me, right? Like that means they have, an hour more with their kids, or maybe they get excited about leaving their corporate job or whatever it is. So that keeps me motivated.
For sure. Yeah. Again, what is the lens that you're creating all of your content through, right? Can you come from a place of service and changing people's lives? And I know that sounds kind of silly because people think, oh, you're just, an online social media coach, or you're just an online expert, or you're just an online YouTube strategist, or whatever it may be that you do. You're not changing lives, but you are through small things that you're doing, like giving people back more time for their families or creating more passive income to help support their families, right? Those things are important. And so if we can come at it from a place of service, I think that makes a world of difference. So I love that. I love that lesson. Thanks so much, Holly, for being on. That was so much great information for everyone listening. So everyone, again, make sure to head into the show notes or the description below and grab her freebie, and make sure to follow on her on all her social media channels. I have all the links below. And thanks again for being on, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me.